From the Big Bang Theory to the creationless view of this planet, from the stars and moons and all the galaxies, to where did humanity get its origins? Who is Jesus? And is he really God? And who are the angels? Do demons really exist? And if so, what are they? Really? I'm James. And this is Kenner. And this is Double-Minded Conversations Down the Rabbit Hole. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to the show. This is Double-Minded Conversations Down the Rabbit Hole. I am James.
I'm Kenner.
I'm Nick.
And on today's episode, we are going to start maybe we might have another episode on this because there's a lot to get through on this, but we're going to do the Council of Nicaea. Now, we all know what the Council of Nicaea is, right?
We do, but maybe they don't.
Okay.
Want to do,
So,
why did I say removed?
is
that normal?
Yeah.
Oh, see, that's why you're the. Yeah, I'm just a stupid bricklayer. Yeah. Right. All right, never mind. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah, paying attention to him. But before we do get started, if you like this stream, go ahead and like it. You know, if you want something to do with your hands and your fingers right now, go ahead and hit that like button and share the live. And if you're not already, subscribe to the channel. That'd be awesome if you did that. All right. So the Council of Nicaea was like a meeting of the minds, so to speak, in 325 AD because of talk of heresy. There was a great debate about heresy within the church. And it started with a guy by the name of Arius and Alexander of Alexandria. Now, I'm going to let Kenner go ahead and start because he's got a lot of information that he wants to give you on Arius. So I'm going to let him take that away.
Okay, great. Yeah, good to see all of you here. So, yeah, a couple of misconceptions here that we want to clear up. People, and I was one of these people years ago before I actually did the homework on my own. But the Council of Nicaea, the question at hand is, did the Council of Nicaea have anything to do with canon? Well, on the surface level, no, it didn't. But we're going to get into how it did affect the future councils and what books were deemed to be allowed into the Bible, right? Like, for instance, the Council of Rome was convened about 60 years after Council of Nicaea, and that's when a lot of religious fathers got together and said, okay, this is canon, this is canon, this is canonical, this is canonical, this isn't. And the Council of Nicaea, 60 years prior, kind of laid the groundwork for what books were even up for debate at that later council. So Arius, he actually went to a school. I'm going to butcher this word. The Canonical School of Alexandria. It's a school that was founded by Mark, and they attributed to Mark, the evangelist, around 60 AD, somewhere in there. And that's where a lot of these great minds would go. People who've been converted to Christianity, like you had philosophers in droves, because Greek philosophy was huge in that region at that time. The Hellenistic people were huge in the Greek philosophy, Plato, et cetera, Neoplatonism, all of those things. And those men, I want to go through a small list here, but there's some men that were paramount to the Council of Nicaea, and backing up probably 20 to 30 years before this, they were students at the School of Alexandria. And And some of the people at that school was Clement of Alexandria, who later became a teacher. Then you had Pantanaeus. Then you had a guy named Origen, and it's Origen. That was his name. And Origen is important because this is probably about 40 to 50 years before the Council of Nicaea. And actually, no, that would have been way earlier. They're attributing him to be like in the first 100 years. Because Arius actually followed Origen's teachings and agreed with his problem with trying to sort out the wording of the Bible and the divinity of Jesus and et cetera, et cetera. But Clement of Alexandria, all of these guys, especially Clement of Alexandria, tried to bridge the gap between Christianity and Greek philosophy. These men were huge Greek philosophers who were then, what's the word, changed religions? Converted. Yeah, there we go. So these men converted. They were Greek philosophers, and they converted into Christianity, and they drug a lot of that Hellenistic stuff with them to try to reason some stuff that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and which what Paul would call the divine mystery, right? So, like these guys were trying to figure out verbatim way back then what exactly this meant, instead of just saying, "Look, it's a mystery; we can't explain it." Another guy was Pantanaeus. He also tried to reconcile Greek philosophy with Christianity, and the man named Origen. He is very important because even though he was 100 or so years before the Council of Nicaea, his work is what led Arius to the great Arian schism, which we're going to get into. But back to Origen, he had a problem with the word begotten, right? He had a problem with that, and he attributed Jesus to being a created being, which in a way he was, because he was flesh, right? In a way he was created. But they took it a step further, saying his complete essence was created. And then fast forward 100 years, you come to Arius. And Arius took it to a whole nother level. He totally did a deep dive on it and understood the problem with trying to filter in Greek mythology, Hellenistic time period traditions, beliefs, Platonism, all of these certain things. They tried to indoctrinate into the scriptures, because you have to understand that this school of Alexandria was by a bunch of Greek philosophers who converted, right? And these people who converted were teaching a version of Christianity to these people that I would say is at odds with what we hold traditional today, especially things like the pantheon and multiple deities, and even the wording is very, very interesting. And we can get into the language part of it later. But what I find to be extremely problematic for us Christians, especially apologetics, is all of the words that we're reading, all these scriptures that we have are written in either classical Greek or Koine Greek. You've got some Aramaic scriptures that have been recovered from writings, but nonetheless, they're Greek. So now you have to say, okay, so was Jesus's 12 disciples speaking Greek, or were they speaking Aramaic, right? Some would argue the originals are actually in Aramaic. We just haven't found them yet. A little bit of proof to that is in the Gospel of Mark, where some Aramaic words are actually put in there, right? Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, right? Mm-hmm. That's an Aramaic language, right? So that tends some biblical scholars to believe that maybe these original writings were written in Aramaic, and then they've been translated into Greek. The problem is you have a simple language like Judaism, which is a very simple, basic, like 6,000 characters in their alphabet or their words, whatever it may be. It's very basic. And then you're translating it up into a language that has like 80,000 different words and stuff like that. So there's a big schism right there in the translation part of it. And one word that is probably the most important word, I believe, leading up to the Council of Nicaea is this word begotten. Okay, because begotten, there's a fly flying around here, and we may have to take a commercial break to knock this dude out. I left the door open too long. But yeah, so if you see me smack James on accident, it's his fault. So yeah,
likewise.
Yeah, likewise. So with the logos, that word logos, the original meaning in Greek philosophy was reason or divine order. right? That's what they called it. And whatever word was translated from the Hebrew, got him, got him, got him. That's right. That's right. Sorry, PETA. We're going to get a phone call from PETA with a pen. Even. So, anyways, I just dazed them, though. Yeah. So, anyways, so he's resurrected. He's a holy fly. So we'll name him Larry. So Larry the Fly is gone. The logos in early Greek philosophy just meant reason or divine order. That's the only thing it meant, right? It was reason or divine order. It wasn't until the adaptation of Christianity that word had to be dealt with, okay? And the word begotten has three different meanings, and I think I scrolled out of it. I don't know. What was the three definitions of begotten?
Like unique, one and only.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. Unique, one and only, or first offspring.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
Okay.
As you're coming into the live, y'all, go ahead and hit that like button. Show us some love.
So these early guys at this church had a problem, or at this school had a problem with that word. Now, did it mean unique? Did it mean literal flesh and blood son? Did it mean someone of the divine nature? I mean, I guess depending on your theology is how you're going to interpret that word, of course, and I'm guilty of that myself. Yeah. But what I can say is the Greek word is monogenes. And again, I guess we're just going to base everything off of the Greek manuscripts we have, because even though people speculate there could be other translations that are of the point of origin,
like Aramaic and
Aramaic and Hebrew, right? We can just so we'll just go ahead and look at it through the lens of everything was originally done in Greek. I mean,
I think that's the safest way to do it.
I think it is.
We have no proof.
Well, we do have some proof with the wording in Mark.
I mean, I get that, but there is no doubt in my mind that Jesus and his disciples and those around them, they spoke Aramaic.
Right.
But there is a lot of doubt in my mind if the original manuscripts were written in Aramaic. I believe that they were written in Greek. I
think that could be true. That could be true because if you look at the Jews of the time, most of their stuff was done through oral tradition anyways, right? So what I think would happen, and some other biblical scholars or biblical scholars agree with this, I don't want to call myself that, but what I will say is that, and Jeremiah and I spoke on this briefly last time he and I got together, and shout out to Jeremiah, hey buddy. But anyways, he couldn't be here today because he's at graduation. But anyways, we think that it was oral tradition, just like the original Old Testament was oral tradition till a certain time. Mm-hmm. And we believe they kept that tradition up into the years after Jesus' death. And that some Greek-speaking people were writing, maybe they spoke Greek and Aramaic, and they were taking in the information and then just translating it into Greek as they were writing. So I mean, that could be why there's some crossing between Aramaic. But who knows? But back to the School of Alexandria. It was an interesting school. Some say it was founded by Mark, that same Mark who wrote Mark. And another member of that church was Athanasius. And Athanasius was a huge opponent of Arius. Who was Arius? Well, we just kind of went through a little bit about who he was. Now, here's what he believed. He believed that Jesus was a divine being, but that he was created. And I can't answer that. Sorry about that. And he believed that Jesus was a created being because of that word begotten. And therefore making him created, that God created Jesus. Right. That God created Jesus. Right. And then through Jesus, all other things were created. So, but anyways, and that was the big schism, because that movement with Arius, grabbed a little bit of traction, and then it grabbed a lot of traction. At first, it was just a few guys because they were scared to step out of line with the dogmatic beliefs of the church and of the early church and of the school. But soon some bishops started taking notice of it and saying, he might be onto something here. And that's what created this big schism. Mm-hmm. The Council of Nicaea, it wasn't solely about Arianism, but it was probably 95% of the reason why they got together, because Constantine wanted to unite the church under one doctrine and that way it can be filtered all throughout Rome, kind of like how Greek mythology was. But anyways, but he wanted one version of it that everyone practiced, right? Even though you had freedom of religion to worship however you please, if you, as far as Rome was concerned, they were going to be a Christian nation, and this Council of Nicaea set the framework for what was called heresy and what wasn't called heresy.
Can I jump in there?
Sure.
What you just said about like it was going to be a Christian nation. Christianity wasn't actually like legal until about like the well not it was legal around that time, but it wasn't the religion of the land until about 380.
Right. Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, 380 was when they put the Bible together, or that was when they at the Council of Rome.
Well, the Bible we already had a canon up until we had a canon before even the Council of Nicaea.
Right, but not that was officially recognized by the state of Rome. That wasn't until 380.
What do you mean by recognized by
until the government stepped in and said
because the church,
right?
The church already had it.
Right, that's a better way to say it. The early church
already had
right. And I think it's important to differentiate the early church from these councils of Nicaea and these councils of all these other people, because they're two different things.
Because I believe that the church had its canon by the end of the 2nd century.
Right, that's true. Yeah. So, I believe that 100%. But that's the early church, right? Like this Church of Alexandria, and you can chime in here as soon as I'm done with this if you like. But this Church of Alexandria was founded by Mark, and some of the things that they were teaching, like all of these guys in that area would have went there and learned from there, and then those guys later became higher ups, bishops, whatever you want to call it.
This isn't a topic that I'm really familiar with. So
sure.
I'm learning as we go along here, but how obviously this was very important.
It's the most important when it comes to canon, even though the canon wasn't discussed here, but we'll get into that.
So can you lay out like a clearer picture of like the opposition and like what the arguments were?
Sure.
I can
sure.
Sure. All right, so there's this guy named Arius, right? And like he was teaching that the Father and the Son were of different substances, right? Mm-hmm. And they used a term called heterousis. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Heterousis. So Alexander of Alexandria, and who else?
Not Alexander the Great.
No, Alexander of Alexandria. Mm-hmm. He was a bishop from Alexandria. And like Hoseas of Cordova, and even Athanasius. Mm-hmm. They were on the Orthodox side, saying that Jesus it was fully God, and he existed eternally with the Father. And Jesus and the Father were made of the same substance, and that's homoousis. Mm-hmm. And so that's basically what the debate was about. Mm-hmm. It's just like the deity of Jesus. Like, did he always exist eternally, like Alexander and Hoseas was saying, or did he come into creation at some point in time? Mm-hmm. But he was never eternal like the Father. So that was basically why they got together for this council. That's why Constantine he had just unified the empire, and he this little squabble within the church caught his attention, and he didn't want anything that was going to like divide the empire. He wanted like stability, total stability within the empire, and that's why he called this council so they can like hash it out, come to some consensus. You know, that's basically
okay. So when it comes to that, like you're speaking of like more high level individuals,
the highest.
When you think about like the average person back in those days, how long did it take for this cultural assimilation to happen? Because you're going from polytheism and pantheon belief,
the Hellenistic time.
Like, what was that transformation like?
Chaotic, I would say. I would say it's extremely chaotic, and it led to a lot of. To me, that's why this school in Alexandria is so important, because they were teaching the doctrine to people who would later go teach it to other people. And some of the peoples that were at the school as students eventually became bishops. And then you have the man Origen. Origen was a student there and then was a teacher there. And he actually thought the same way. He was the originator of Arius' viewpoint. Arius just rode on his shoulder and kind of evolved it over time. It wasn't until the canon was specifically established in around 380, right, AD, that this is the only way we're going to teach it. Because even though at the Council of Nicaea, Arius' viewpoint lost, right? Even the only reason why it lost is because the majority of the people, the overwhelming majority of the people there, didn't agree with him, right? They wanted to keep everything nice and sweet in the box, and they thought it was the truth, and it may have been, right? But his viewpoint lost out. He was then excommunicated because he was a bishop. He was excommunicated from the church.
Yep.
Right? He got kicked out because of his beliefs. But there were a lot of people who believed his way, and there were still schisms within different places. And Paul, I believe, tried to touch on some stuff in his writing, saying, look, the Church of God is not divided. You know what I mean? We need to do a show on Paul and the importance of him. But back to what we're talking about here, I just find it interesting that leading up to the Council of Nicaea, you have a bunch of these Greeks who converted to Christianity. And all of these guys are influenced by Greek mythology, Greek philosophy, right? The Pantheon, even those guys. And I think they tried to sneak that into Christianity. I honestly believe that to make it more palatable for the conversion of everyone else in the realm. You know what I mean? So that way they wouldn't feel like, oh, another religion's coming and taking us over. If they kind of acclimated some of their stuff into it, you know, to make it look like something it wasn't, and maybe they would jump on board with it. And that's just one viewpoint on that. There's multiple viewpoints.
It would have been great to be a fly on the wall during this meeting.
We just killed it. Larry. We just killed Larry.
Any other questions?
Not yet.
Okay.
All right. So now where do we jump in at?
Well, I would like to say that even though he was excommunicated, his belief system, right? Like the only thing that really differed between Arianism, or they call it Arianism, but it was just one little topic. Was Jesus created by God, or was Jesus always there? Right?
And was he made of the same substance?
Well, but to me, that's a Greek word that they tried to slip in there. Because you never heard Jews ever, even in the disciples, you never heard any talk of that.
Right. But
until later.
Here nor there. I mean, they still decided, or they still debated on, like, what was the substance of Jesus? What was he made of? Was he and the Father the same?
Right. And I believe that.
He and the Father the same. In
but see, they're trying to explain the mystery the best way they can. Right? Mm-hmm. They're trying to explain everything. And no one can explain everything. Not us, not anyone. Anyone who tells you they have it all figured out is lying to you. It's a mystery. You don't, all these, and I watch a lot of Christian YouTube shorts and YouTube videos that say proof of this or proof of the Bible or proof. Dude, there's no proof needed. No proof necessary. You know what I'm saying? It's not about the proof. It might have been about the proof to the original 12 who were right there and seen everything. But Jesus made it clear. Blessed are you who believe in me, but more blessed are those who have not seen and they believe, right? I mean, he's been willing to die horrendous deaths for what they interpreted as Jesus the Messiah, right? They believe that he was, as do we. But blessed are those who see without belief, or who believe without seeing. And that's very important because Arius' viewpoint was, he thought, and Origen thought first, well, we're going to stick to Arius because that was the whole point. Even though the whole point of the Council of Nicaea was this schism between Arianism and the status quo, so to speak, of the toe the party line type situation going on, which is what still goes on at the Vatican, ironically enough. But anyways, and I'm not saying they're wrong. Right? There's no way to know, right? All you can do is read the Bible for yourself, ask the Holy Spirit to interpret it for you, and that's all you can do. You know, if these podcasts we do offer some insight into avenues to go down that you haven't thought about, then praise God, that's the whole point of this whole thing. But But
And while we're on that topic, yeah, if you guys out there watching, if you have anything to say, if you want to contribute, go ahead and click that link that's in the comments and join the show. We'd love to have you. We'd love to get your insight on all these topics that we talk about every day.
Absolutely. Okay. Who we got there? Oh, okay. So back to what you were saying about the schism. There was one small problem with unifying the church, and that problem was Jesus God? Actually, it wasn't even was Jesus God. It was Jesus created, or was he eternal? Because some would argue that eternal just means like you always had to have been and you always will be till the end. Some would say that's what the word eternal means. I don't believe that whatsoever.
What do you think eternal is?
Well, okay, I'm gonna answer that question with a question. What do you think Jesus meant by saying, "Whoever believes in me, though he was dead, will not die but have eternal life"? That's the kind of eternal life that I'm talking about. Like you can have eternal life and not always existed in the past. You know what I mean? Jesus is very clear on that.
So you think the sticking point is the difference between ethereal existence,
right? Right. That's right.
We just had that, right?
What's that?
We just saw that in Bible study.
We did in our Bible study. We absolutely did. But yeah, so
where that at? I'm looking at.
Oh no, you're good. That was a good. I had a light bulb go off when I was saying that actually. But the problem was Arius' view was 99% of everything these guys agree with, I agree with. But what I don't agree with you on is that Jesus is God, right? Or that Jesus always existed, with God. Right? That was his thing. He believed that Jesus was a created being, which God created Jesus. Or I don't even like to use the word Jesus, and I'm not trying to be funny here or sarcastic. But his name wasn't always Jesus. He's the son, the Son of God, and and the problem I have with Arianism is he did exist before he came down to earth. He even says that. He saw Lucifer fall from the sky. He said, I was in heaven glorified with God, and then God sent me down here. So obviously Jesus taught that he existed before. Arianism is not talking about that problem. They're saying that Jesus did exist with God before the beginning, but he was created by God before the beginning. And then everything through Jesus was then created, right? And a lot of people say, well, how can you be eternal and have a beginning? Well, we just summed it up right there.
I can find it. If you could, tell me where it's
Whoever believes in Jesus Christ shall not perish, but have eternal life.
I've heard it as everlasting.
It's either one.
But everlasting and eternal.
It's the same. Things. Well,
everlasting and two different things, or eternal are two different things. Mm-hmm. Eternal doesn't have a beginning; it doesn't have an end. Everlasting is you live forever.
So, do you believe we are eternal?
No,
you don't. So, what do you think God meant when He said, "I knew you before you were in the womb"?
Because He created us.
When? That's the point. When?
At conception.
Okay, but God said, God said He knew us by name before we was in the womb.
Right. Because He created us.
Mm-hmm.
He has foreknowledge of us.
Right, foreknowledge.
He has foreknowledge of us.
I would say foreknowledge probably is a better word there.
So you could almost
Did it
you could almost analogize that to like building a building, right? Like you have the idea in your head of what you want it, what it's going to be, and then you make the blueprint, and then God kind of does the same thing with all.
That's foreknowledge, yeah.
Right. So it doesn't mean it's not necessarily like reincarnation or we were an everlasting soul that became a body that will return to being an everlasting soul. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Kind of, sort of. I think I kind of get what you're saying. Yeah. Like it's like that. Like the blueprint thing that you were saying. Yeah, God had us in mind before He created us.
Sure.
Basically.
And how does this council? Is this council like Trinitarianism that the Catholics believe in? Was that already?
These are Catholics. These are the first Catholics.
Okay, so this is what helps.
Yes.
They were more of an Orthodox group. Catholic in the sense that word means universal. So,
Right.
like, the beginning church was Catholic, not Roman Catholic, the Roman Catholicism that we see today. That's not what the church was. But for all intents and purposes, yes, the early church was Catholic, meaning universal, one.
The
one
early
body,
church, but
one
the
body.
teachings, God said, Jesus said nothing about. He just said my church or Peter's church. On you know what I'm saying, or
Which I don't buy that it was Peter's church.
I don't. Well, I mean, on this rock I'll build
Because
my
like
church.
Peter didn't die on the cross for us.
Right. What I meant was on this rock I'll build my church.
But
Right?
it wasn't the rock of Peter. It was the profession
Of what he said.
What he just said.
Right. What he just said. Right.
You are the Christ, the Son
Yeah.
of the living
Yes.
God.
Yes.
That's what he
Yes.
was building the church.
That is the
on.
foundation for our church.
Yeah, not
Absolutely.
anything that Peter. Maybe
Right.
it came out of Peter's mouth, but like
Right.
the church wasn't built
Right.
on Peter.
Right. And people get that misconstrued a lot too, because when Jesus
I agree.
named him Cephas, right, that word just means stone. That word means stone in Aramaic, right? So Jesus changed his name to Stone.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and he said, "On this stone I'll build my church." But the Catholic Church consider it to mean, "Oh, he's the first pope. But see, they're just totally overlooking what Jesus said about James. James was the first leader of the church after Jesus' crucifixion. James, the brother of Jesus.
Not me.
No, not this James. No, he's the leader of the podcast. Yes, and I'm the killer of flies, and he's the knower of stuff. So we got a really good, thing going here. Shout out to everybody watching. Just want to say hello. If you have any questions, please feel free, or even disagreements. We love disagreements. One of two things: we can either teach you something, or we can learn something. By no means are we saying we are the authoritative viewpoint on this. We are offering interpretations from years and years of biblical study and life lessons that we filter through the Holy Spirit and try to give you the best example.
Mm-hmm.
And we disagree on some things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We definitely disagree on some interpretations, and that's okay. Right? We're not going to have a council to decide who can be in the group if you don't believe this or that. But that's exactly what they did back at the council.
If President Trump wanted to make sure that we hash this out, I'll have a council.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Totally. Yeah.
But Arius, I believe his viewpoint in saying that Jesus was created by God meant that Jesus couldn't be God, and that was the whole theology of the early Catholic Church. Was that actually that didn't come in until a little bit later, that Jesus and God are one, the one person. And this word essence, see, that's how I know that these were Greek philosophers who were trying to smuggle in some of their Hellenistic upbringing or roots or whatever, because it's very simple the way I see it. People saw God in Jesus. People are supposed to see Jesus in us, right? It's the same thing. You know what I'm saying? People are supposed to see Jesus in us, just like people saw God in Jesus. Doesn't mean that we're Jesus, right? And Arius would argue it doesn't mean that Jesus was God, but that schism was big enough because just that itty bitty little fraction of a disagreement knocks the whole foundation of the church off its rockers. That's why it's so important.
I agree with that. I agree. We should nail that down.
Sure.
I do think that Jesus is God, and I agree with your second point that people are supposed to see Jesus in us.
But we're not Jesus.
But we're not Jesus.
Right. Just like people saw God in Jesus. When just like the angel of the Lord, right? He had a divine name, you know what I mean? And so, but we can get into I would love to do a show on that.
Yeah.
I would love to do a show specifically on that.
I would too.
We can do a 3-part series.
The angel of the Lord is we've had a lot of debates about that. So
yeah, we do, because it's either the angel, and we're going to do a little segue. I mean, this is the rabbit hole. We can do a little segue. We won't get too deep into it to get off topic.
Yeah, we gotta stay to time though.
Oh, we do, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So you're right. Maybe we'll spitball this and we'll put together a series on that.
Also, shoot us some ideas in the comments, either during the show or come back if you watch the show afterwards. Leave us comments of future shows, things that you'd like for us to talk about, and then maybe you guys can join the show.
That's awesome. And the thing about, we would love to hear from you guys, absolutely. But the reason why the Council of Nicaea was so important right? I don't even think they knew how important it was back then. But it was so important in shaping biblical canon, even though it didn't directly shape biblical canon, it indirectly did by saying that all of these works over here are now heresy. This way of thinking, this line of thinking, any writings that agree with this is now heresy. So that kind of limits the number of books that are even available to the canon now. Because before they were labeled heresy, you had all these other writings, the apocryphal books, you had the Gnostic Gospels, you know what I mean? Like you had all, but since this one council said those are all heresy, they were out and couldn't even be considered for biblical canon.
Let me ask, because that's interesting what you just said. So if you believe that this, like those that were against Arius at this time, if you believe that those people eventually was kind of like hijacked by the Roman Catholic Church, right?
Not necessarily. These guys were the first Roman Catholic Church.
Okay,
Council of Nicaea.
Okay,
these guys were the
I'll
establishment.
I'll go with you there.
Yeah.
So you say that they're basically the Roman Catholic Church,
right?
Well, if you're saying that because of this, then they decided to push books out of the canon. The Roman Catholic Church today still has the Apocrypha.
Right. No,
what books?
I'm not talking on that. I'm saying any writings that were considered like authoritative were now deemed heretical if they shed any light on the way Arius thought. That's how dangerous Arius' viewpoint was. They had to totally cut out, like cancer, anything that could make it look like Jesus and God were two separate things. And any religious work that talked about that was gone. They had to have their little doctrine, their dogma right here in this pretty box. And if you said
do you have any do you have any examples of some of these writings?
We can argue the Apocrypha. You know, we could argue some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Like, why weren't those incorporated? Like, why wasn't some of those holy writings incorporated into the?
Well, the Catholic Church still uses the Apocrypha.
The Apocrypha, sure. Well, but that's not Dead Sea Scrolls. Apocrypha is not Dead Sea Scrolls.
But
some of the books, some of the books, like Enoch, Enoch, some of them were. But that word Apocrypha just means what?
Hidden, hidden.
And a lot of the apocryphal books, although some of them were historical, like the Maccabees, right? The revolt, we know that happened. But the problem with the Maccabees is that lifted up the Jews. And the Catholic Church, like, they couldn't have that. You know what I mean? And I believe ultimately that's why it was taken out.
I just think that we should always err on the side of caution when we say, because we end up, I guess, arguing from silence. We don't know if, unless you have an example of what was actually pushed out and like because of this and that, we don't really know if anything.
Okay, so the Book of Abraham. Well, you want to stick to New Testament stuff? Is that what you want to do here? Since that's all these guys were talking about. So the Gnostic Gospels, a lot of letters. Okay, so when they put together the canon, what they said was any book that is not directly related to the source or a known member that knew the source was non-canonical. And if they couldn't trace the roots back to either the person that claimed to have written it or a person that knew the person that claimed to have written it, it was not in the canon, which is why I believe the Gospels are very, very reliable, right? In a sense, right? We can get into some differences, but we don't have to do that in here. But what I will say is that the biblical canon that was put together 60 years after the Council of Nicaea at the Council of Rome was put together by a group of people who said, one group already had a canon put together. Hey, this is the canon. This is what we're going with. And ultimately that won. But they wouldn't even put on the debate floor anything that was in any way related to what Arius thought. Even though Arius didn't directly say, I believe what this book here, if that book said anything that separates Jesus and God from being one, was completely eradicated from the Bible. Yeah, the Council of Rome, right. About 60 years after the Council of Nicaea.
Okay. And this is what I have. In 380 AD, the Western canon of the Bible was
Which is what they
solidified
would have
at the
been.
Council of Rome. This canon, based on Athanasius of Alexandria's list,
Mhm.
was finalized to prepare for St. Jerome's Vulgate Bible translation.
Mhm.
Prior to this, various lists and councils contributed to the development of the canon, but the Council of Rome is considered a key event in its finalization.
Right. Meaning, like, it was now a national. This is the book, right, for the Roman Catholic Church. This is the book, right? If you're going to claim to if you're going to live
Just
here, if
trying
you're
to
going to,
find what
yeah.
books were in there.
well, it'd probably still be the same ones. Plus, I'm sure the apocryphal books made it to the Vulgate.
Okay, let me look.
I'm sure the apocryphal books made it to the Vulgate. But like the Book of Enoch, like anything that was really, really, I mean, look, let's face it. The Book of Revelation almost didn't make it. You know, like now we know that maybe Paul didn't write Hebrews. You know, now we know that, well, maybe he only wrote this many, right? So, but back then they considered it gospel. You know, so there's definitely human error in it. And anytime humans get involved with anything, and anytime money and power is involved in anything, you're going to have people leaning one way or the other, or being influenced one way or the other. We can say divinely inspired all day long. That I agree with that. Some of these writings completely divinely inspired. Absolutely.
Well, I think that also is part of the struggle for a lot of people these days who don't believe,
right?
Because there are things that you can point to that say
right.
you can't prove this,
right?
Coming from an
ultra
right.
logical perception.
But that's more of a not philosophical. That's more of a you have to prove it, right? What
I
I'm
see that a lot with a lot of things these days now. Like that's why there are so many political disagreements that, or like even if you want to go, paranormal or something, like there are just always going to be people and have been forever, which will be, who even if they see it in front of their eyes and can touch it and smell it, and they're still not going to believe.
That's right. And even okay, so Jordan Peterson put it the best way with this situation. You have a group of men who say this book is authoritative, right? And it could be any religious canon. He was saying it could be this, could be anything. This book is authoritative. That's dangerous for someone to say that. What's even more dangerous is saying my interpretation of this book is more important than your interpretation of this book. We have the power, we have the money, so we win the day.
Well, don't you think it's just a little bit disingenuous to just say that, like, some random group, like these guys, I believe they did have authority to say this book is authoritative. I mean, it's not like us. It's
right.
Like a group of us sitting around saying, "Oh yeah, this book is authoritative, and this one isn't."
Okay,
but these were like apostolic fathers. These were church
no, these
fathers.
weren't apostolic fathers. Apostolic fathers were disciples of the disciples.
I get that.
These guys are 300 years later.
I get that.
These guys are Greeks,
but
who knew nothing of the Old Testament.
I get that.
Who have been brought in and converted to Christianity because of what Jesus did.
Right. And that's why I'm saying that the canon, for the most part, was already established by the end of the second century.
I agree.
It was finalized in
on the local level.
It was fine. Yeah.
Right. I agree.
It's just brought to the Western.
I agree.
You had the two halves of the empire. You had the East and you had the West.
Right.
And it was brought over to the West.
Right.
And kind of finalized there.
But so there was many versions of the early writings.
Yeah.
Like you've got the Gnostic Gospels, right? Like those were completely snuffed out, and rightfully so. Some of them,
are
insane.
I'm not saying they're trash, but
right, some of them are insane.
So is it fair to say that one of their objectives was to
one of whose objectives?
The Council of Nicaea.
Okay.
That one of the main objectives was to come to as much of an agreement on objective truth and of what they were going to disseminate as filter down.
Right. So eventually become the canon, right? I agree.
I think in the eyes of Constantine, all he wanted to do was peace.
He wanted
peace.
And he left it up to the church to disseminate that peace.
Yeah, he wanted them to come to a compromise, and he was actually upset with how the council went because they like you said, they ended up excommunicating Arius and the few bishops that agreed with him. I think
Mhm.
everyone that was there except for Arius and 2 bishops uh, signed the Nicene Creed.
Right, and some of them were swayed. They were with
Yeah.
Arius, but they
And
saw
then
what,
they came
but
over.
they saw what was going to happen to Arius, and they're like, "Well, we ain't having that." So
or they could have been,
or they believe,
or they believe,
or they believe.
Well, it's a fascinating thought exercise to just think about how critical this meeting was for the direction of humanity,
Absolutely,
and religion, and
100%.
to
Western
think about,
civilization.
like you were saying, they were trying
Yeah.
to, certain people were trying to shoehorn in
Mhm.
the old
Mhm.
beliefs,
Mhm.
and how different our belief system and history itself could have gone, or how many
Mhm.
wars could have been started, or
Mhm.
what kind of fractures could have been created
Mhm.
if this hadn't played out the way that it had. Not that it was
Right.
perfect, or not that the
Right.
people in it were perfect,
Right.
but it set up a set of circumstances that consequentially led us to where we are today.
All this thing did, from my viewpoint, looking at it, because I'm a small business owner, and I look at everything. I just want everything to flow smoothly. Right? Don't care this. I just want everything to run smoothly. I don't care about your input. I don't care about what you think. Just make it run smoothly. I'm not taking sides here. Let it run smoothly. War is bad for business. Like, it's not. I'm going to put us out there.
That is a good point.
I'm going to put us out there on Front Street. Nick and I have been to prison, right? We are been redeemed and saved by God's grace and led us out of addiction. And we're here to talk to you today and try to help other people in our boat. That's our main objective. But I will say, in prison, though, when wars would break out between races or whatever, Aryans, not these Aryans, not totally different group of Aryans. Yeah, but anyways, anytime there was a war or someone got stabbed or something happened, the whole place was locked down and nobody could do business.
Nobody.
Constantine wanted to unite Rome because war was bad for business.
Yeah.
If we can't buy and sell goods here, we have no money.
Right.
And that's what all it was about.
They understood.
Yeah.
You have to believe that they understood the magnitude of how important it
Maybe
was.
they did. I would like to think they did.
I would like to think so.
Yeah.
Too.
I think Constantine was brilliant. Well, Constantine actually did later convert to Christianity. I think he was a believer, but he finally got baptized on his deathbed, I believe.
Right.
And who baptized him?
Eusebius of
And he believed in Arius. He believed in Arius, didn't he?
hold on.
He believed.
You're right. Like
Yeah.
the one that
That
baptized him
Mhm.
kind of got swayed by the Arians, and then so there was 2 Eusebius.
Right.
There was
But that opens up an interesting conversation. Like, okay, so even though the Arians got excommunicated, or Arius got excommunicated, said your viewpoint is gone, 60, 70 years later, however much it was, when Constantine got baptized, was baptized by a bishop who believed in Arius.
So you know what?
So you see what I'm saying? So there's a lot of,
Here it is. Yeah. Eusebius of Nicomedia.
Nicomedia.
Yeah.
We should name our channel. Name my.
Eusebius of Nicomedia. And
Oh, that was the first Nickelodeon. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Constantine was baptized on his deathbed, and so he was probably siding on the side of Arius.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's interesting. You know what I mean? And but
it did after the council. Like, it didn't die out.
Right, but the fact that there were still people who believed in that.
Yeah, and
which were a lot of Gnostics believed in.
Got a big following, and I think the Gnosticism around that time was actually dying out or close to being dead. So
sure, but I think that
the Gnostics weren't even.
I don't think the Gnostics believed in what Arius was saying. I'm just saying they would side with him because the big church, who deemed the Gnostics heresy, also deemed Arius heresy. So they were thinking, a friend of my enemy is my friend.
But I think the Gnosticism had died out by the time of that first council in 325. I think Gnosticism was dead or close to being completely eradicated.
We can say that. As far as the numbers, I'm sure they were severely diluted. But once something's called a heresy, what's that mean? If you teach this, you're what? You're killed. You're dead. You're burned. You're smoked. You're thrown in a, you know what I mean? So
You're gone.
right. So they went underground with stuff that they thought. You know what I mean? You couldn't be the way that Christians were persecuted back then. Arians were persecuted that way, and so were the Gnostics, and probably rightfully so. I mean, I don't know. You know, we could do a show on some Gnostic
Well, it
gospels.
shows just how dangerous.
Mm-hmm. If you go against the man.
Right, exactly.
If you go against the man, you're going to get snuffed out.
Right. Yeah.
It's the same thing that's been going on and going on. Just hopefully the man, in this sense, is being led by God, right? In the Spirit, not by greed, power, and that's up for debate. But hey, that's all I have for today. We kind of got to do a hard stop here.
We're kind of like wrapping up, getting close to time where we have to stop. Got some stuff going on today, so this was a really interesting conversation. I would like to come back to it.
Sure. You want to do a part two?
I'm going to throw that.
Sure. So you down for a part two?
Sounds like there's a lot here.
Yeah. There's a lot.
It's important, bro.
I had a lot of notes, and I didn't even get to.
It's important,
most
man.
of it.
And one thing that I find fascinating about this and just about everything else to do with the Bible is despite the gap of time between people that lived those days and people that live today, it shows that like no matter how civilized we consider ourselves to be, we still can relate to these people because we haven't evolved as much as we like to think we have.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. I mean, we are Western civilization.
Yeah.
And this is the birth of Western civilization right now.
And it shows how easily our faith or any faith could be so easily threatened and have to go underground. Like you see, you know, in China, the Christians there, like you see,
getting tortured.
getting tortured. And they literally memorize a Bible page so that they can get together and have Bible studies underground. It could easily turn that way.
That's the front lines of Christianity in places like that. Yeah. China, North Korea, all these places.
It just shows the power of God and how strong this influence is on people that they would go to those lengths to risk their persecution and die for their faith. And help.
Who's going to die for a lie?
Right. We've got to carry the flame, you know, just like
that's
well said. Yeah, that's well said. Yeah.
That's a good point. And that was another reason why so many showed up. Like I believe Constantine, he invited like 1800 bishops from all over the empire, but only about a little over 300 were able to make it. But those 300, they showed up because they just a few decades before that, they were being persecuted. They were dying for what they believed, and they showed up to get this right.
And I think that's a very important point you just made, and I think we should use that point to segue into the opening of our next show. I'd like to do that. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
God bless everyone. And James, you want to close it out?
Yeah, remember that Jesus loves you. Thanks a bunch. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time on Double-Minded Conversations Down the Rabbit Hole.
God bless.
God bless.
Thank you.